Hi, Stino. Welcome to the High Press. And today we're going to talk about FFP, in particular Everton and the 10 points they got deducted last week, and also Manchester City and Chelsea. Man City could be in a lot of trouble, but let's go through it. So FFP, and another term that's just popped up out of nowhere, probably been around for a while, but I've never heard it, is PSR, which is the profitability and easy for me to say, and sustainability rules, profitability and sustainability rules. And it's just to make football clubs aware that they have a responsibility to be ethical with their finances. This vid's about, I'm going to give you a little bit of a breakdown, very dummy's guide on FFP, how it's calculated, but also we're going to talk about the three clubs and the impact for other teams. And then at the end, I'm going to offer a suggestion of my own, and I would feel free, please, to put down in the comments what you would do. But I've heard all sorts of things from Stop FFP, from Michael Owen, to, the rules need to be more rigid from myself and others. So listen, I agree with the process of FFP, definitely. I think it's good, and it stops people buying up all the Premier League players and sticking them in the reserves. You could say that Man City do that already. We'll come back onto those. But essentially, I don't think the rules are strict enough, and the clubs have found loopholes, which, again, I'll come on to. There's a further impact from that. Things like, let's say that Man City is found guilty of any of the 115 charges they've got against them, and I'll break those down into blocks later. Will they get the trophies taken off them? Does it matter? And in the case of Everton being docked 10 points this season for something they've previously done, what about the relegated teams that would have stayed up? One of them that would have stayed up, well, Everton would have probably gone down if they'd have done in that same year. So the impact's fairly huge in terms of FFP for other clubs other than the ones that have been investigated. So let's just explain FFP very quickly. So this is a statement which came from Everton, but we'll come back onto Everton. But the very basic rule is that all clubs need to follow is not to make a loss of more than £105 million during a rolling 3-year period. And in Everton's case, there were 20 million over that margin, which gave them those dock points. So 105 million over a 3-year rolling period is, you can lose 105 million in terms of minus profit in year one of the 3, and then the other 2 years, as long as you're in a little bit of profit or you break even, then you would still bypass these rules. The fact that it's a 3-year period is a problem, in my opinion, which we'll come back to at the end. But let's just show a little bit about what profit and loss is for those that don't know. I'm going to keep it really, really simple. So it's revenue or turnover versus minus expenditure. So turnover are things like, these are the kind of match day turnovers that you get. So match day is the blue one there. This is Man City's since 2008, 2009. Broadcasting revenue is another one. Things like Sky and TNT giving the rights to the clubs, and the FA, the Premier League, giving them rights to show their matches. And the last one is commercial one, which is commercial revenue like sponsorship and things like shirt sales and things like that. But then you've got expenditure. One of the biggest expenditures is wages. And as you can see from this graphic, in 2011, Man City's wages were actually, I think it's about 114 or 113% higher than their revenue. So they were losing money just on wages alone. There's a lot of what we call creative accounting going on, I believe. Other things are like expenditures like transfer fees, but they can get amortised, which I'll come back onto. What can the FA do, and what can UEFA do in their capacity in this? What can they do to these clubs? Well, they can do these things. So they can give you a slap on the wrist, a fine, a points deduction, which is what we've seen with Everton, withhold revenue from a UEFA competition, adjust how many players you can register for those competitions or restrict the number, disqualification from a competition in progress, which is highly unusual, exclusion from a future competition, and the withdrawal of a title or award. So we did see this with Man City, who've got some previous with UEFA in previous years where, they've been fined, they've been withdrawn from competition or future competitions. And the punishment that these clubs tend to get out of. Now, there's an argument to say someone like Man City can break these rules because, when we get onto them, 115 charges against them is a huge amount. And some of the charges are not cooperating with both UEFA at the time and now the FA, the Premier League. And, for me, there's no smoke without fire. So is it right for these teams to essentially cheat? I know nothing's been proven yet on these 115, but essentially bend these rules so far that it gives them the trophies and the cups and the titles they want, whilst other clubs suffer because of it. So let me just explain how players' transfers work, because you see these things going 100 million here, 60 million here, 80 million here, and you wonder how these teams can get through FFP. They do it with something called amortization. And what this is, let's say we bought a player on the left-hand side for £50 million transfer fee. We can, in accounting, you can actually amortize that asset because they are intangible assets to people. And basically you can amortize that £10 million year on year. So the value of that asset is 40 million after year one, 30 million after year two. So this is over a 5-year contract. We'll come back to that. So that's how these clubs, they don't show 50 million in that 1 year. They amortize it over the life of the contract, which is why you've seen longer contracts from some people like Chelsea, for example. So if we then look at selling the player, so let's say that the player's been there 3 years and their value after the 3 years, amortizing it at 10 million is now 20 million, and we sell the player for 35 million, then we've made, or the club have made, a 15 million pound profit, which instantly goes down to the bottom line and adds 15 million pound to the FFP calculation, essentially in a positive way. So this is why you see the likes of Brighton buying, youngsters up from South America, selling them on for huge profits, and they're going to kind of, with that model, they're going to avoid FFP forever. In the second scenario, you've got, let's say that in that same period, you couldn't sell that player for 35 million, but you sold him for 10 million. So the book value is 20 million. So you actually lose minus 10 here. So minus 10 million pounds. So this is obviously a problem. And the Carlos Tevez was a great example of that at Manchester City, where he wasn't playing, he wanted out, he travelled back home and wouldn't come back for training, etc., etc. And the reason that Man City sat him on the bench for a while and just refused to play him rather than sell him is because they didn't think they could get the book value from him, and therefore would have shown a loss. On the flip side, finally on this bit, I know it's a bit heavy at this point, but I just need to explain it, is youth players. So if you brought somebody through your academy, or they've been brought for zero value and then they're worth something at the end, and I'll take Brennan Johnson as a great example that went from Nottingham Forest to Tottenham. So the book value is zero because he came through the youth academy. It didn't cost the club anything in terms of transfer fees. And they sold him to Tottenham for a huge profit. So that profit would automatically go down and help the FFP there. So any teams that you see selling your youth players, it's actually for a reason. And you look at the likes of, again, Manchester City, they tend to sell their youth players. There's not many come through that system and get into the first team. I know there are exceptions, but they do buy up a lot of the talent, send them out on loan, bring them back, get them a value, and away they go in terms of putting profit on that bottom line. So Manchester City are a particularly tricky club to track in terms of FFP for one of these reasons. Now, the transfer value is put on the FFP, or the profit and loss, whereas the wages, and that could be amortized, but the wages have to be shown in that year. So you can't amortize the wages at all. They've got to be shown in that year. Now, going on to Everton, Everton have come back and they believe that there's a number of mitigating circumstances, which they explained to the commission at the time. And one important issue that Everton faced was having to pull out of a lucrative naming rights deal for the stadium with Alisher Usmanov, I butchered that one, his holding company USM, which was worth about £200 million. So they had to pull out of that when Russia invaded Ukraine. So that's one of the mitigating circumstances that Everton argued. The other one that they argued is they took out some loans for a new stadium, which should not count in the process because infrastructure projects sit outside PSR, but the Commission disagreed. So that's probably what's going to go back in the appeal. So let's move on to Man City. So what are Man City's 115 charges? Well, we can't go through them all. They're all named by an acronym that leads to the Premier League rules. Essentially, you put them into these 5 categories. So the first section is, I'll scroll down for you. You can read this if you want, but I'm just going to put a synopsis. So the first section relates to the provision of accurate information that gives a fair and true value of the club's financial position. So this one's based around sponsorship revenue and just revenue in general, but I think that's down to sponsorship revenue and its related parties and operating costs. Section 2, between 2009, 10 and 12 and 13, relates to the remuneration, the wages that were paid, or the wages and the bonuses, the services, money that was paid to the manager, which wasn't Pep, it was Roberto Mancini at the time. The third section relates to the Premier League clubs complying with the UEFA regulation. Again, licensing and financial fair play. That's a fairly broad one. And it's the fourth one here that's going to be the killer, I think. And it's the PSR again. It's the profitability and sustainability rules. And this charge covers 3 seasons from 2015 to 2018. And that's the likely one to hit them, I would say. And then the final one, and the same happened with UEFA here when UEFA investigated Manchester City, is that it doesn't seem like they're complying and providing the documents that these bodies have asked for, or delaying them, or I don't know if they're changing them, doctoring them, creative accounting, etc., etc. But these seem to be the main problems. So I've heard some people online saying, should Man City be sort of expelled or dropped to the non-leagues? That's unlikely to happen for me. That's really left for businesses that reform into a new co. So when I say businesses, I mean football clubs, like Rangers did. They went into administration, they got points deducted, then they went into liquidation, which meant the club no longer exists. They got dropped down to the 3rd division in Scotland with a slightly different name. They had to buy all their assets back and then started again from the lower league. So I don't think Man City is going to be relegated many leagues. I think it's going to be a points thing and maybe a hefty fine. But this brings on the issue overall of what's wrong with FFP and what's wrong with the system. And for me, they should change it. I mean, the rules need to be more black and white. At the minute, there's so many shades of grey. I don't think there's like 20 million over for Everton over that 3-year period. I mean, that's not a huge... I know it's a breach, but it's not a huge amount. It doesn't seem like it equates to 10 points for me. So if there isn't already, which I don't think there is, there should be a system. So if you go this much over, you get docked this many points. If you go this much over, you go this much points, and so on. So if somebody's gone well over it, or they've fabricated or adjusted with creative accounting the accounts, and it's shown that they are completely false and the real picture is this, then obviously the points should increase on that. But it should be a layered level of points, really. So really an additional points deduction for the severity of the breach, I suppose. But there are so many issues to nail down before this can happen, like sponsorship issues, for example. Okay, my own club, Nottingham Forest, not in any FFP trouble at the minute. But Marinakis, the owner, owns 4 clubs now. He's just bought his 4th club, which includes Forest. Now, if Marinakis' business wanted to sponsor all the clubs, and a fair value for sponsorship would be, I don't know, a shirt sponsor, 5 million a year, let's say, for an example, and he sponsors all the clubs for 50 million a year, basically is pumping money through that system kind of illegally. And there's lots of owners that own businesses and also own the club, and they use that for their own benefit. But in terms of the sponsorship, the Premier League are now pulling the plug a little bit on that, and they use this fair and reasonable use policy, where they say, well, the average sponsorship for a Premier League team is X, so you then can't do 10X. We have to put it down on the books as X. However much money you put in, we need to put it in as X. And the other will show as a loan from the owner. Long-term player contracts is another one they're coming down on. I think they're going for a 4-year maximum. I mean, you've seen some clubs do 6 and 7 year contracts, and you wonder what if this player's no good? Why are you keeping them for this long? But it's actually, remember the amortization, it's actually to amortize that transfer fee over that period of time. You've got to still pay the wages, and that's still got to show in your financial accounts every year, but you can amortize that transfer fee, whatever it is, over that period of time. So if you only get him on a 2-year contract, you can only amortize it over 2 years, if that makes sense. Loans to sister clubs, that's another one. Loan fees, so you send a player out to your sister club and the loan fee is way more than you would pay normally. That's another one that needs nailing down. So there's all these little tips and tricks and loopholes that people use to abuse this system. The next thing for me is the 3-year rolling. It doesn't work because, it's no good for the clubs that got relegated during those seasons. And as you can see now, we've got clubs looking at suing Everton. And, there's a major issue there because they believe that Everton took away their right to stay up and have that extra money in the Premier League and not have to get rid of players. So for me, I mean, there's got to be time to submit the accounts. So the issue here is that any business has to submit their accounts, get them checked. And this takes more time than the season, from the books close, the season ending. And this is the problem. And this is why I think they didn't do it year on year. But for me, they need to move towards that year on year, because what that does is it helps the clubs that get relegated. So let's say they close the books at the end in April. Let's say they close the books in April. They then got till August when the season kicks off again to check any irregularities on those books. But this only works if these things are black and white, like I mentioned. So when they close those books, if they're found to be, like Everton, for example, if they found that, yes, we're going to dock you minus 10 points because of this much over and this poor accounting, and these are the points that are on our system, we've taken 10 points off you, and that means the third team during that year that went down, that's shown as relegated, would stay up. I mean, there's still a few issues with this. One of the issues is they might have had to sell players already. Season ticket prices have already been sort of put out as a championship team and they're now a Premier League team. So there are issues here. But this 3-year rolling thing is causing more problems for me than actually helps. Just to not really summarise, but just give an overall feeling, is that there's 2 main problems here that causes FFP. It's not match day revenue, because that's always quite small compared to the rest of your ins and out revenue. But the first is transfers. The second is contract lengths. That's linked to one area, including player recruitment. The second one is through naming rights and sponsorship and sister clubs. I think they all fall into one category. So there's 2 groups that are really killing this. And for me, I know people are going to hate this, but the wages have gone crazy, like really crazy. I remember one of the Premier League players years ago getting 35,000 a week, and that was like, wow, that's incredible. And now look what they're on, hundreds of thousands a week. But why can't FIFA do a global wage cap, for example, and maybe even a transfer cap that you can't go over 100 million, or you can't go over a certain fee in terms of wages? And that for me would make for more of a credible league pyramid, where all the clubs, all the lower clubs aren't struggling as much, and the bigger clubs, are not falling into financial fair play difficulties. None of them are a perfect solution, but please, I'd love to know your thoughts. Please put them down in the comments. Remember to like and subscribe. Get your thoughts down. What would you do with FFP? Would you scrap it altogether, or would you change the rules? Do you agree or disagree with any of my suggestions? And I'll see you soon.